On the evening of March 14, 2015, FBI agents quietly entered a modest hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana. They were looking for a man who had been hiding in plain sight for decades. A man who was heir to one of New York's wealthiest real estate dynasties. A man suspected of getting away with not just one murder, but 3. When agents located him in his room, they found more than $40,000 in cash, a loaded handgun, a fake identification card, and perhaps most disturbing of all, a latex mask designed to disguise his face. The next night, millions of Americans would watch an HBO documentary that ended with what appeared to be this man confessing to those very murders while muttering to himself in a bathroom, completely unaware his microphone was still recording. "What the hell did I do?" he whispered. "Killed them all, of course." But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of true crime stories, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do. So if that's of interest to you, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. Robert Allen Durst was born on April 12, 1943 in New York City, into a family that already had everything money could buy. His father, Seymour Durst, was a powerful real estate magnate whose family company, the Durst Organization, would eventually become one of the most prominent property empires in Manhattan. The Dursts owned and managed millions of square feet of prime office towers and residential buildings across the city. They were one of New York's wealthiest families, mentioned in the same breath as the Trumps and the Helmsleys. By all accounts, young Robert should have had a golden childhood. But tragedy would mark Robert Durst from a very young age. When Robert was just 7 years old, in November of 1950, his mother Bernice climbed onto the roof of the family's 3-story home in Scarsdale, New York, in the middle of the night. Police and firefighters responded to the scene, spending nearly half an hour trying to talk her down and position themselves to save her. But as one fireman climbed a ladder to reach her, Bernice flung herself from the roof, plunging past him to her death below. She was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. Robert would later claim that his father had brought him to the window to wave to his mother, and that he watched her fall. Whether or not this is true remains disputed. His younger brother Douglas has adamantly denied that any of the 4 Durst children witnessed their mother's death, claiming they were all at a neighbor's house at the time. What is not disputed is that the death of his mother changed Robert Durst forever. A psychiatric evaluation conducted when Robert was 10 years old noted intense anger issues, particularly directed at his father. The doctor delivering the assessment made the gloomy prediction that the boy's anger was of such intensity that it could result in personality decomposition, and possibly even schizophrenia. Robert grew into a troubled young man who drifted through life despite all the advantages of his wealthy upbringing. He attended Lehigh University, then briefly enrolled in a doctoral program at UCLA, where he met a woman who would become one of his closest friends, Susan Berman, the daughter of a well-known Las Vegas organized crime figure. After dropping out of UCLA, Robert eventually returned to New York, reluctantly taking a position at the family business. But in 1971, something changed. Robert met a young dental hygienist named Kathleen McCormick. By all accounts, it was a whirlwind romance. After just 2 dates, Robert convinced Kathleen to move with him to Vermont, where the couple opened a health food store called All Good Things. For a brief period, life seemed almost normal for Robert Durst. Kathleen, who went by Kathy, was beautiful, ambitious, and full of dreams for her future. She came from humble beginnings on Long Island and was determined to make something of herself. In 1973, the couple returned to New York at the insistence of Robert's father, who wanted his eldest son back in the family business. On April 12th of that year, Robert's 30th birthday, the couple married. At first, friends and family believed Kathy had found her fairy tale. She had married into one of the wealthiest families in New York. She enrolled first in nursing school, then in medical school at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, working toward her dream of becoming a pediatrician. By early 1982, she was just a few months away from graduating, but behind closed doors, the marriage was falling apart. According to friends and family, Robert Durst had become increasingly controlling, possessive, and violent. Kathy confided in close friends about the abuse she was suffering. She told them that Robert would hit her, that he would fly into unpredictable rages, and that she was becoming genuinely afraid of him. At one point, she reportedly told a friend that if anything ever happened to her, it would be Robert who was responsible. In January 1982, just weeks before Kathy disappeared, she went to an emergency room in New York City with head injuries and facial bruising. She refused to press charges against her husband, but hospital records documented the visit. Around this same time, Kathy's friends noticed that she seemed to be preparing to leave Robert. She had begun gathering paperwork necessary for a divorce. She was becoming more financially independent as she neared the end of medical school, and Robert, according to those who knew them, seemed to be losing control of her. On the evening of January 31st, 1982, Kathy attended a dinner party at the Connecticut home of her close friend, Gilbert Najami. It was a Sunday evening, and Kathy showed up unexpectedly, dressed in sweatpants, which friends found unusual because she typically dressed more formally. She seemed distracted and on edge. After the gathering, Robert picked her up to drive her back to their cottage in South Salem, New York. According to Robert, he then drove Kathy to a train station in Westchester, where she boarded a train to Manhattan. He claimed he spoke to her later that night by phone from a payphone while walking the dog, and she confirmed that she had arrived safely at their Manhattan apartment. But nobody ever saw Kathleen McCormick Durst again. 5 days passed before Robert reported his wife missing. When investigators questioned him, they found his story oddly detailed in some ways and completely vague in others. He said he had last spoken to her from a payphone while walking the dog, but the nearest payphone was 3 miles away, and the night in question had been cold and rainy. At first, some workers at the couple's Manhattan apartment building seemed to confirm that Kathy had been there that night, which focused the investigation on Manhattan. But as time went on, those witnesses changed their stories. They admitted they may have been mistaken. Even more suspicious was a phone call that Kathy's medical school received after her disappearance. Someone claiming to be Kathy called the dean to say she was sick and wouldn't be coming to class. The voice was female, but years later, investigators would come to believe that the caller was not Kathy at all. They suspected it was Robert's friend Susan Berman, helping to create the illusion that Kathy was still alive. With no body and conflicting witness accounts, the investigation into Kathy's disappearance quickly stalled. Robert hired a lawyer and refused to answer further questions. His family's wealth and powerful connections seemed to shield him from serious scrutiny. The case went cold. For nearly 2 decades, Robert Durst lived his life as a free man. But he was not without his troubles during this period. His relationship with his own family deteriorated dramatically. In 1992, Robert's father made a decision that would fuel his eldest son's rage for years to come. Seymour Durst broke with tradition and appointed his second son, Douglas, to take over the family real estate empire instead of Robert. According to Douglas, this was because of Robert's erratic behavior and his father's concerns about his mental stability. Robert, who felt entitled to the position as the firstborn, was furious. He believed Douglas had stolen what was rightfully his, and the two brothers became bitter enemies. Robert would eventually sue the family and receive a $65 million settlement in 2006, but the damage was done. Douglas later told reporters that he genuinely feared Robert might try to kill him. "There's no doubt in my mind," Douglas said, "that if he had the opportunity to kill me, he would." Then in the year 2000, everything changed. Westchester County District Attorney Jeanine Pirro decided to reopen the investigation into Kathy Durst's disappearance. New leads were being pursued, and investigators wanted to speak with Susan Berman, Robert's close friend, who had served as his unofficial spokesperson back in 1982. Berman had helped shape the narrative that Kathy had simply run away, possibly with a drug dealer, possibly to escape her marriage. Now investigators wanted to know what Berman actually knew about what had happened to Kathy. Robert Durst learned that the investigation had been reopened from his sister Wendy. According to later testimony, he panicked. He sent Susan Berman $50,000 in 2 payments shortly before Christmas 2000. And then on Christmas Eve of that year, Susan Berman was found dead in her Los Angeles home. She had been shot execution style, a single bullet to the back of her head at point-blank range. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting she had let her killer into the house. Nothing had been stolen. It appeared that whoever killed Susan Berman did so specifically to silence her. A few days after the murder, the Beverly Hills Police Department received an anonymous note. The handwritten letter contained just Susan Berman's address and a single word written in block letters: cadaver. The envelope was addressed to Beverly Hills Police, with Beverly misspelled in a distinctive way. The note had been postmarked the day before Berman's body was discovered, meaning the person who sent it knew she was dead before anyone else did. Robert Durst immediately became a suspect. Investigators discovered that he had been in California in the days leading up to Berman's death and had flown out of San Francisco the night before her body was found. But once again, Robert refused to cooperate with investigators. He denied writing the cadaver note. He denied killing Susan Berman. And without direct evidence linking him to the crime scene, prosecutors couldn't make an arrest. Instead of staying in New York to face the renewed scrutiny, Robert Durst did something extraordinary. He disappeared. In late 2000, Robert rented a cheap apartment in Galveston, Texas, a small coastal town about 50 miles southeast of Houston. But he didn't rent it under his own name. He assumed the identity of Dorothy Siner, posing as a mute elderly woman. He wore women's clothing and a wig when interacting with his landlord, communicating only through handwritten notes to explain his supposed inability to speak. The heir to a billion-dollar real estate fortune was now living in a $300 a month apartment, disguised as a mute woman, hiding from police on the opposite end of the country. It was here in Galveston that Robert Durst's story would take its most disturbing turn yet. One of Robert's neighbors in the rundown apartment building was a 71-year-old man named Morris Black. Black was a cranky, isolated loner with a troubled past of his own. The two men developed an unlikely acquaintance, though the nature of their relationship remains somewhat mysterious. Some investigators have speculated that Black may have discovered who Durst really was and began pressuring him, perhaps for money. Others believe Black may have been involved with Durst in some way connected to Kathy McCormack's disappearance years earlier. Whatever the truth, on September 28, 2001, Morris Black was killed inside Robert Durst's apartment. What happened next is almost impossible to comprehend. On September 30th, a 13-year-old boy was fishing with his father near Galveston Bay when he spotted something floating in the water. It was a human torso. Within hours, police recovered additional garbage bags from the bay containing severed human limbs. A man's arms and legs had been carefully separated from his body and stuffed into black plastic bags. One leg washed ashore separately nearby. The victim's head was never found. Inside one of the garbage bags, investigators discovered a newspaper with a delivery address sticker that led them to an apartment building in Galveston. There, they found a gruesome trail of blood leading from Morris Black's apartment to the unit across the hall, the one rented by the mysterious Dorothy Siner. Inside Siner's apartment, they found blood spatter on the walls, cuts on the linoleum floor consistent with dismemberment, and evidence that someone had been washing blood down the drain. When police investigated further, they discovered that Dorothy Siner wasn't a mute elderly woman at all. She was Robert Durst, the heir to a New York real estate fortune and a suspect in multiple unsolved murders. Robert Durst was arrested on October 9, 2001 and charged with Morris Black's murder. But incredibly, he posted $250,000 bail and was released. When he failed to appear for a court hearing a week later, he became a fugitive. For 45 days, Robert Durst was on the run. Despite his face being plastered across the news, despite his distinctive appearance and manner, he managed to evade capture. He shaved his head and assumed Morris Black's identity, using his deceased neighbor's driver's license. He rented a car under Black's name and drove across the country. His time as a fugitive came to an end in the most absurd way imaginable. On November 30th, 2001, Robert Durst was arrested in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, after being caught shoplifting inside a Wegmans supermarket. The items he attempted to steal: a chicken salad sandwich, a newspaper, and a package of Band-Aids. He had $500 in cash in his pocket at the time, and investigators discovered $37,000 more in the trunk of his rental car, along with 2 guns, marijuana, Morris Black's driver's license, and directions to the Connecticut home of Gilbert Najami, Kathy McCormack's best friend. Why one of America's wealthiest fugitives would risk capture by shoplifting a sandwich remains one of the many inexplicable aspects of the Robert Durst story. Extradited back to Texas, Robert Durst stood trial in 2003 for the murder of Morris Black. The prosecution believed this would be an easy case. After all, Durst had admitted to killing Black and to dismembering his body. The evidence was overwhelming. The dismemberment had been performed with surgical precision, using a paring knife, 2 saws, and an axe. The judge who presided over the case would later comment that the body was cut perfectly, like a surgeon who knew how to use this tool on this bone and a certain kind of tool on that muscle. It looked like not a first-time job. But Robert Durst had something most defendants don't have: nearly unlimited wealth to hire the best defense attorneys money could buy. His legal team, led by legendary Texas attorney Dick DeGuerin, pursued a bold strategy. They didn't deny that Durst had killed Morris Black or that he had cut up his body. Instead, they argued that the killing had been accidental, the result of a struggle during which Black grabbed Durst's gun and the weapon discharged. The dismemberment, they argued, happened only after Black was already dead, the panicked actions of a man with mental health issues who didn't know what else to do. Because Morris Black's head was never recovered, prosecutors could not present forensic evidence to dispute Durst's account of how the shooting had occurred. They couldn't prove where exactly the bullet had entered Black's skull or whether the wound was consistent with a struggle. On November 11, 2003, the jury returned its verdict: not guilty of murder. Robert Durst walked out of the courtroom a free man, though he would later plead guilty to evidence tampering and bail jumping, serving just 3 years in prison before being paroled in 2005. For years, it seemed like Robert Durst had gotten away with everything. 3 people connected to him were dead or missing: his wife Kathy, his best friend Susan Berman, and his neighbor Morris Black. Yet he remained free. His wealth and privilege had apparently shielded him from justice once again. But then, in 2010, a filmmaker named Andrew Jarecki released a dramatic film called All Good Things, loosely based on the Durst case, starring Ryan Gosling. Robert Durst saw the film and remarkably reached out to Jarecki. He wanted to tell his story his own way. He pitched Jarecki on making a documentary about his life, one where he could present his own version of events. Jarecki agreed, and filming began on what would become one of the most consequential documentaries in true crime history. Over the course of several years, Jarecki conducted multiple interviews with Robert Durst. The man who had refused to speak to police for decades now sat in front of cameras for hours, discussing his wife's disappearance, Susan Berman's murder, and the killing of Morris Black. He seemed to believe he was smart enough to control the narrative, to come across as an eccentric but innocent man who had simply been the victim of terrible circumstances. He was wrong. During the production of the documentary, which would be titled The Jinx: The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst, the filmmakers discovered a crucial piece of evidence. Susan Berman's stepson, Sareb Kaufman, gave them a letter that Robert Durst had written to Susan in 1999. When they compared the handwriting on that letter to the anonymous cadaver note sent to police after Berman's murder, the similarities were striking. Not only did the handwriting appear to match, but both contained the same distinctive misspelling: Beverly instead of Beverly. The filmmakers realized they had uncovered potentially damning criminal evidence. They shared their findings with the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. In the final episode of the documentary, which was scheduled to air on March 15, 2015, Andrew Jarecki confronted Robert Durst with the evidence. He showed Durst the 2 envelopes side by side, the one he had sent to Susan Berman and the anonymous cadaver note. The handwriting was nearly identical. The misspelling was the same. Durst, visibly uncomfortable, denied writing the cadaver note. But when Jarecki asked him to point out which handwriting sample was his, Durst couldn't tell them apart. Then something extraordinary happened. After the interview concluded, Robert Durst went to the bathroom, apparently unaware that his microphone was still recording. And as he sat there alone, talking to himself as he had done since childhood, he muttered words that would stun millions of viewers. "There it is, you're caught," he whispered. "You're right, of course, but you can't imagine. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." The night before that final episode aired, FBI agents arrested Robert Durst at his New Orleans hotel. He was charged with the first-degree murder of Susan Berman. The trial, delayed by legal maneuvering and the COVID-19 pandemic, didn't conclude until September 2021. During the proceedings, Durst took the stand in his own defense, just as he had done in the Morris Black trial. But this time, things went differently. Under relentless cross-examination by prosecutor John Lewin, Durst admitted for the first time that he had written the cadaver note directing police to Susan Berman's body. He also admitted he had been in Los Angeles at the time of her murder, something he had denied for years. He acknowledged lying under oath about numerous aspects of his life. "I did not kill Susan Berman," he testified at one point. but if I had, I would lie about it. It was perhaps the most damning non-confession ever uttered in a courtroom. On September 17, 2021, Robert Durst was found guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Susan Berman. The following month, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Shortly after the sentencing, Durst was also charged with the murder of his wife, Kathy, nearly 40 years after her disappearance. Prosecutors said they had gathered enough evidence to finally bring him to trial for the crime that had started it all. But Robert Durst would never face that trial. On January 10, 2022, just months after his conviction, Robert Durst died of cardiac arrest at a California hospital. He was 78 years old. His death came while his conviction for Susan Berman's murder was still under appeal, meaning that technically, under California law, the conviction was automatically vacated. For the families of his victims, it was a devastating end to decades of seeking justice. Robert Abrams, an attorney for Kathy McCormack's family, issued a statement after Durst's death that captured their frustration. Kathy's family hopes that her story will, at the very least, shine a light on the extent to which rich and powerful people are able to manipulate and control the criminal justice system. In the end, Robert Durst was a man who seemingly got away with murder for most of his life. He used his vast wealth to hire elite attorneys, to go into hiding, to control narratives, and to evade consequences that ordinary people would have faced decades earlier. 3 people connected to him died violently: his wife, who was never found, his best friend, who was silenced before she could talk to police, and his neighbor, whose body he coldly dismembered and dumped in a bay. Only in the final years of his life did justice begin to catch up with him, and even then, death intervened before he could face trial for Kathy McCormack's murder. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Robert Durst case is that bathroom confession, those mumbled words captured by a microphone he forgot he was wearing. Killed them all, of course. Whether those words were a genuine confession or just the ramblings of a disturbed mind talking to itself, as Durst later claimed, they perfectly encapsulated the dark truth that so many had suspected for so long. Robert Durst's brother Douglas summed up his sibling's life with brutal honesty after his death. Bob lived a sad, painful, and tragic life. We hope his death brings some closure to those he hurt. The families of Kathy McCormack, Susan Berman, and Morris Black are still waiting for that closure. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. So click here and give them a watch. All right, until next time, see you.